My aunt volunteered to organize my grandmother's estate sale. She sold 3 paintings I had specifically asked to keep to herself for $20 each. I found out when I saw them hanging in her living room during Thanksgiving. Tonight, every single story is about a betrayal from someone completely trusted with something important. 5 people, 5 discoveries. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. My name is Rachel. I am 36 years old. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, and 10 months ago I discovered that my aunt, who had volunteered to organize my late grandmother's estate sale on behalf of our entire family, had sold 3 specific paintings I had explicitly requested to keep, pieces my grandmother had painted herself during her later years and that held significant sentimental value to me personally, to herself, for $20 each, a fraction of even their modest actual value, without ever informing me. These items had been sold rather than set aside as I had specifically requested weeks before the sale occurred. My aunt's name is Patricia, my mother's older sister, and I want to describe the specific arrangement that led to this situation, our family having collectively agreed that Patricia, given her retirement and greater available time, would handle the practical logistics of sorting and selling various items from our grandmother's estate that family members did not specifically claim, an arrangement that included my own clear, written request, sent via text message weeks before the actual sale date, asking that 3 specific paintings be set aside for me rather than included in the general sale inventory. I want to describe how I discovered these paintings had not actually been preserved as I requested, visiting Patricia's home for Thanksgiving several months after the estate sale had concluded, recognizing immediately, displayed prominently in her own living room, the exact 3 paintings I had specifically asked to keep, pieces distinctive enough in style and subject matter that there was no possibility of confusion with similar but different artwork. I want to describe the specific, disorienting moment of standing in my aunt's living room, staring at paintings I had believed were safely stored somewhere awaiting my collection, understanding instead that they had apparently been sold during the very estate sale I had asked to have them excluded from, and that the buyer had been Patricia herself. I want to describe the conversation I had with Patricia once I processed this initial shock, asking her directly, as calmly as I could manage given the circumstances, how these specific paintings had come to be hanging in her own home rather than set aside for me as I had requested. Patricia's initial explanation centered on claiming she simply did not remember receiving my specific request, an explanation that became difficult to sustain once I was able to locate and show her the actual text message I had sent, complete with timestamp confirming she had read it weeks before the sale occurred. Once this initial explanation proved impossible to maintain, Patricia offered a more complicated account, suggesting that during the actual chaos of the sale day itself, she had simply forgotten which specific items had been requested by which family members, and had ended up purchasing these particular paintings herself simply because she personally admired them, without connecting in the moment that these were the same pieces I had specifically asked to be preserved. I want to describe why this explanation, even if genuinely representing confusion rather than deliberate deception, still felt deeply troubling once fully considered, because regardless of whether the confusion was genuine, Patricia had somehow specifically purchased for a token $20 each, the exact 3 paintings I had personally requested, a coincidence that felt difficult to fully accept as accidental given how specifically she would have needed to select these particular items from among what family members later confirmed was a considerably larger sale inventory of numerous other paintings and artwork. Update 4 months later. Patricia has agreed, following several difficult conversations and some direct family mediation involving my mother, to return the 3 paintings to me, though she has requested reimbursement for the $20 each she originally paid, a request I found genuinely surprising given the broader context of the situation, but that I ultimately agreed to simply to resolve the matter and finally have these meaningful pieces of my grandmother's work back in my own possession. My relationship with Patricia remains considerably strained. While I have accepted her eventual return of the paintings as a resolution to the immediate practical issue, the underlying question of whether this represented genuine confusion or a more deliberate choice to acquire meaningful family items for herself while family members were trusting her with fair, transparent estate management continues to affect how I view her more broadly, particularly given her request for reimbursement rather than simply returning items that, by her own admission, she should never have purchased in the first place given her clear knowledge of my specific prior request regarding these exact pieces. Patricia's $20 purchases revealed something that took months to unravel. Our second story tonight is about a betrayal that involved money too, but in a completely different way, through something that should have protected against exactly this kind of situation. Wait, this is the part that gets me most. Here is what happened. My name is Daniel. I am 28 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and 9 months ago I discovered that my roommate had been using my personal information to apply for and open multiple credit cards over the preceding 14 months, a pattern I only uncovered when I attempted to apply for my own mortgage pre-approval, and found my credit report contained several accounts I had absolutely no knowledge of, along with a credit utilization rate that had clearly damaged my score in ways that were now directly complicating my own significant financial plans. My roommate's name is Brandon, and we had shared our apartment for approximately 2 years, and I want to describe the specific process of this discovery, sitting with a mortgage loan officer who was reviewing my credit report, watching her expression shift into visible confusion as she described accounts and activity that made no sense given my own understanding of my financial history, prompting me to request a complete copy of this report for my own careful review once our meeting concluded. I want to describe what I found once I actually examined this complete credit history myself, discovering 4 separate credit card accounts I had never applied for or authorized, opened across a period spanning approximately 14 months, each one showing a pattern of initial charges followed by minimum payments that had gradually fallen behind, creating exactly the kind of damaging credit utilization and payment history that had now derailed my own legitimate mortgage application. I want to describe the specific process of investigating how this could have occurred, contacting each credit card company directly, learning that all 4 accounts had been opened using my correct social security number and other personal identifying information, but with a mailing address that differed from my own, an address that, once I researched it, I recognized as belonging to Brandon's parents, where he had apparently been having statements sent specifically to avoid my own awareness of these accounts' existence. I want to describe the confrontation that followed once I understood this pattern definitively, presenting Brandon directly with printouts of these 4 accounts and their associated address information, watching him move through initial attempted denial before the specific, undeniable combination of evidence, my personal information, his parents' address, and his own inability to provide any explanation for how this could have occurred without his direct involvement, made continued denial genuinely impossible to sustain. Update: 4 months later, Brandon eventually acknowledged full responsibility for opening these accounts, explaining that he had experienced significant financial difficulty during the period in question, difficulty he had never disclosed to me directly, and had made what he characterized as a desperate decision to use my identity specifically because he had access to my personal information through our shared living situation and believed, incorrectly, that he could manage and pay down these accounts before I ever discovered their existence. I filed a formal police report and worked extensively with each credit card company and the credit bureaus to dispute and remove these fraudulent accounts from my report, a process that took several months but ultimately succeeded in restoring my credit to its previous standing, allowing me to eventually complete my mortgage application successfully, though considerably delayed from my original timeline. Brandon moved out of our apartment immediately following this discovery, And while he has made some effort to repay the outstanding balances on these fraudulent accounts as part of a formal restitution agreement our respective attorneys negotiated, I continue processing the specific violation of understanding that someone I had trusted enough to share my daily living space with for 2 years had been willing to systematically use my own identity against me for well over a year without any apparent hesitation about the genuine harm this could cause to my own financial future and significant life plans. Brandon used Daniel's identity for 14 months without ever being suspected. Our third story tonight is about a betrayal that also involved identity, but this time it was not about credit or money. It was about who someone actually was. This is the part that stays with me. Here is what happened. My name is Michelle. I am 33 years old. I live in Sacramento, California, and 8 months ago I discovered that my fiancé had legally changed his name 6 years before we met, information he had never disclosed throughout our entire 3-year relationship. A discovery I made accidentally while helping him gather documentation for our upcoming marriage license application, finding an old identification card among his important papers that displayed a completely different first and last name, along with a legal name change certificate confirming this transition had occurred years before we had ever met. My fiancé's name, as I had always known him, was Kevin, and I want to describe the specific moment I found this documentation, going through a box of his important papers specifically to locate his birth certificate for our marriage license requirements, finding instead this old identification card and legal name change certificate, documents that revealed the person I had known as Kevin for 3 years and was preparing to marry, had actually been born and lived under an entirely different identity for the first several decades of his life. I want to describe what it felt like to discover this information so that unexpectedly holding documentation that confirmed my fiancé's entire identity, as I had known it, represented a legal choice he had made years before we met rather than simply his authentic original name. A discovery that immediately raised significant questions about why he had never once mentioned this history throughout 3 years of what I had believed represented complete, honest partnership as we built our life together and planned our marriage. I want to describe the conversation that followed once I confronted Kevin with what I had found, watching him move through initial visible distress at having been discovered this way rather than through his own disclosure, before providing an explanation that revealed genuine trauma from his childhood and early adult years, describing a difficult, abusive family situation that had led him, once he reached legal adulthood, to make the decision to legally separate himself from this history entirely, including changing his name specifically to create distance from a family and identity he associated with significant harm and difficulty. I want to describe why, despite genuinely sympathizing with the difficult history Kevin described, I still struggled significantly with understanding why he had chosen never to share any of this with me throughout 3 years of what I had believed represented complete honesty and partnership, particularly given how significant this information felt. Not because his original name or family history should have mattered to how I loved him, but because the sustained, deliberate choice to conceal something this fundamental about his own identity and history raised difficult questions about what else he might have similarly chosen not to disclose throughout our relationship. Update: 4 months later. Kevin and I have engaged in extensive couples counseling specifically focused on processing this discovery. Sessions that have helped me understand more completely the genuine trauma underlying his original decision to change his identity, while also helping both of us examine the specific choice to maintain this secret throughout our entire relationship, rather than eventually trusting me with this significant part of his history. I have made the decision to continue our engagement, though our wedding has been postponed while we continue this therapeutic work, wanting to ensure we build our marriage on a foundation of genuine, complete honesty rather than proceeding forward, while any significant history remains concealed between us. Kevin has since shared additional details about his original family and childhood circumstances that he had never previously disclosed, a process that, while difficult, has felt like genuine progress toward the kind of complete partnership I need us to have before proceeding with marriage, though I continue working through my own complicated feelings about having discovered this significant information accidentally rather than through his own choice to share it with me directly. Kevin's identity had been rebuilt from trauma, but the secrecy itself became its own betrayal. Our fourth story tonight is about a betrayal that involved no secrecy about identity at all, but rather secrecy about something happening in plain sight for years. Wait, let that sink in. Here is what happened. My name is Andrew. I am 30 years old. I live in Houston, Texas, and 7 months ago, upon reaching the age when my trust fund, established by my late grandfather years earlier, was supposed to fully transfer to my independent control, I discovered that my grandmother, who had served as trustee throughout my childhood and young adulthood, had been making regular, substantial distributions to my cousin from what should have been exclusively my own trust fund, distributions that had continued for years without my knowledge or consent, significantly reducing what should have been my full inheritance. My cousin's name is Marcus, and I want to describe the specific circumstances of this discovery, meeting with the trust's attorney to formally transfer full control to myself as originally specified in my grandfather's estate planning, a meeting during which the attorney reviewed the complete distribution history with me, revealing regular payments to Marcus spanning nearly a decade that I had absolutely no previous knowledge of. I want to describe what this attorney's review actually revealed once I understood its full scope, finding that my grandmother had been making these distributions to Marcus consistently, totaling across the full period an amount that represented nearly 40% of what should have been my own complete trust fund, decisions made entirely at her discretion as trustee without any requirement to inform me of these choices given my status as a minor, and then young adult beneficiary who had not yet reached the age of full, independent control specified in the original trust documentation. I want to describe the conversation I had with my grandmother once I understood this pattern, asking her directly why she had made these substantial distributions to Marcus specifically, from funds my own grandfather had established exclusively for my benefit, watching her explain with what seemed like genuine if painful honesty, that Marcus's own family had experienced significant financial hardship during these years, circumstances she had felt compelled to address using her discretionary authority as trustee, believing in her own explanation that my grandfather would have wanted her to help family members in genuine need using whatever resources were available to her. I want to describe why this explanation, while reflecting what appeared to be genuine compassion for Marcus's family circumstances, still felt like a significant violation once fully understood because, regardless of her stated motivation, this trust fund had been established specifically and exclusively for my own benefit, and her decision to redirect such a substantial portion toward Marcus, without ever informing me or seeking my input despite years passing where I had grown old enough to at least be consulted about decisions affecting my own inheritance, represented a fundamental breach of the specific trust and responsibility she had been given regarding these particular funds. Update 4 months later. I have consulted with my own attorney regarding whether any legal recourse exists to recover these distributed funds, learning that while my grandmother's actions technically fell within her legal discretionary authority as trustee, the specific pattern and scale of these distributions may still support some claim given questions about whether they genuinely served my own interests as the trust's intended beneficiary, rather than simply reflecting her own separate desire to help Marcus's family through whatever means were available to her. This situation has created significant strain within our broader family, with my own mother, my grandmother's daughter, expressing genuine distress at learning about this pattern, while Marcus's family has understandably found the entire situation deeply uncomfortable given their own genuine financial need during the years these distributions occurred. I continue working through both the practical financial implications of this discovery and the more significant emotional processing of understanding that my grandmother, someone I had always trusted completely, had made a series of significant decisions over nearly a decade that substantially reduced what should have been my own inheritance, all without ever considering that I might have wanted or deserved to be informed as I grew older and more capable of understanding these kinds of significant financial decisions affecting my own future. Andrew's grandmother redirected nearly 40% of his inheritance without ever telling him. Our final story tonight, Story 5, is about a betrayal that also involved inheritance. But this time the betrayal was not about where money went. It was about who was told it existed in the first place. This is the last story. Here is what happened. My name is Stephanie. I am 39 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and 6 months ago, following our uncle's unexpected death, I discovered that my brother had actually known for several years about a life insurance policy our uncle had established, naming both of us as equal beneficiaries, information he had never once shared with me despite this knowledge existing throughout this entire period, a discovery I only made when the insurance company itself contacted me directly following our uncle's death to begin processing my portion of the claim. My brother's name is Jonathan, and I want to describe the specific circumstances of this discovery. Receiving an unexpected call from an insurance company representative shortly after our uncle's funeral, initially confused about why they were contacting me specifically, learning through this conversation that our uncle had established this policy years earlier, naming both Jonathan and myself as equal 50% beneficiaries, and that the company's records indicated Jonathan had actually been aware of and in contact with them regarding this policy for several years. Based on some routine beneficiary confirmation correspondence, he had apparently responded to on behalf of both of us without my knowledge. I want to describe what it felt like to learn this information from a complete stranger rather than my own brother. Understanding that Jonathan had apparently known about this significant policy, one that would eventually provide both of us with substantial financial benefit. For years, without ever once mentioning its existence to me despite numerous conversations we had shared about our uncle, his health, and various family matters throughout this same period. I want to describe the conversation I had with Jonathan once I processed this initial shock, asking him directly why he had never mentioned this policy's existence despite apparently knowing about it for years. Watching him offer an explanation that centered on not wanting to seem like he was anticipating or discussing our uncle's eventual death while our uncle was still alive, a sentiment I could understand in the abstract but that felt increasingly difficult to accept as the sole, complete explanation once I considered that simply informing me of the policy's existence would not have required any discussion of anticipated timing or morbid speculation, but could have been shared as simple, factual information about our shared future financial planning. Update: 4 months later. Jonathan and I have had several extended conversations attempting to fully understand his reasoning for maintaining this silence, conversations during which he has acknowledged that his explanation about not wanting to seem like he was anticipating our uncle's death likely represented only part of his actual reasoning, eventually admitting that he had also felt some genuine, if difficult to fully articulate, sense of wanting to maintain some form of special connection or knowledge regarding our uncle that he did not share equally with me. An admission that revealed some underlying sibling dynamic I had not previously recognized, but that apparently influenced his decision to keep this significant information private for years. The actual insurance claim process itself proceeded smoothly once I understood my own status as beneficiary, and both Jonathan and I received our equal shares as our uncle had originally intended. However, I continue processing the specific discomfort of understanding that my own brother had access to significant information about our shared financial future for years, choosing to keep this knowledge private rather than sharing something that, regardless of his stated reasoning, ultimately represented a choice to maintain informational advantage over his own sister for reasons that felt, once fully examined, considerably more complicated than the simple explanation he had initially offered. That's all 5 stories tonight. If any of these hit close to home, Let me know in the comments below. If you want more stories like this, every single day, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. A like helps YouTube show this to more people who might need to hear. Tonight, tomorrow's video has a story that might be the most shocking one yet. So make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.